will do. Hold on, I got to figure out my PowerPoint. There we go. Okay, so just to start off, I think we're going to do just an introduction of everybody. We're not going to do any business here tonight. This is purely an educational session just to kind of give a refresher on what TIF is and what to expect in your role. And then, you know, what happens after it comes through your body. So do you want to? Oh, I can do that. Thank you. Thanks, Cynthia. I'll introduce myself first. I'm Megan Miller. I'm with the law firm of Gilmore and Bell. We are the city's Economic Development Council. I've been working with you guys for quite a few years now on doing this. Yeah. I've done quite a few of these. So I do talk kind of fast. So I'll try to slow it down. And if you have any questions, this is going to be really informal. So just stop me, ask your question, and then we can make sure we can get it answered.
And you'll just want to make sure that you push the button to talk. So they are off until they're, there's a button.
Right here.
I don't need it. Want me to go first? Oh, I'm Kelly Kabilski. That's all I got.
Denise Harwood, interim superintendent.
Jennifer Justice.
Don Hanks.
Bruce Kramer, Kramer Capital Management.
Oh, yeah, please. Steve, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Steve Sarver.
And then Adam.
Yeah. You said it, but I think you.
Yep.
Too soon.
Yeah, that may be.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so first we'll just go over the basics. So what is tax increment financing? TIF is a method of diverting taxes to pay for public and or private costs associated with building a project. So there are two revenue sources that come out of a TIF. One is called payments in lieu of taxes, which will be otherwise referred to as pilots. 100% of the pilots are captured by the TIF. We will get into this later. That's just kind of an overview. I have some tables. The next are economic activity taxes, otherwise known as EATs. 50% of these are captured by the TIF. All of that money that is captured flows into a fund called the Special Allocation Fund. So no new taxes are created by TIF. That's a common misconception. It's just capturing of already generated taxes. There is a base below pilots, and the pilots are the amount of new taxes over what is being produced. So the base is what is currently being produced today. EATs is the same concept. Only 50% of that total additional revenue is captured. In most cases, the EATs base is zero because it's a blank place, right? So if we're just as an example, if you look at the marketplace, which has a TIF on top of it, there was a base of zero because nothing was built on there. The base taxes do go back to the taxing jurisdictions. The amounts above the base, again, flow into the Special Allocation Fund. Okay, so hold on, I went too far. Did I? Sorry, guys. Here we go. Sorry, I'm there now. Okay, so how does TIF work? So the real property assessed valuation is frozen at the assessed value base that we have the county certify at the time of project approval. So the county assessor certifies the value. The increase in assessed value over that base is applied to the tax rates to create an increment. 100% of that increment is captured. So the assessors are required to do this. And they do so by adding the most recently ascertained equalized assessed valuation of each parcel. So it's each one and then the base over that. The sales tax revenues are frozen at the base level collected during the calendar year prior to the project approval. So what we'll do generally is we'll ask the business, if there's an existing business, we'll ask, what are your tax receipts from the year prior? And we'll generate that as the base. That base, if there was one, would flow back to the taxing jurisdictions that collect the sales tax. Otherwise, it's zero, and then everything is the increment. And 50% of that flows to the taxing jurisdictions, 50% goes into the special allocation fund. All right, and here's one of our handy dandy tables. So as an example, we have before TIF and during TIF. So our base, we have a property assessed value at $1,000. The levy is $5 per $100 of assessed value for a total revenue of $50. So if we look here, we have our base. This $50 base before TIF and during TIF is received by the taxing jurisdictions. So our increment, after the project is completed, the total assessed value is $100,000, same levy. Then you have a revenue of $5,000. The increment is then $4,950. This is the pilot. So during the TIF, that increment would flow into the special allocation fund. So that amount remains constant, and the other amount, you missed it with pictures, but the other amount changes based on the assessed valuation. Oh, yeah. Yes. So yeah, no, well, we can email them to you. I'll send them to you without my notes because my notes are all over them. So the amount that changes, so when the assessed value goes up on the project, which is what we assume, right? The assessed value is going to go up each year that the project and as things are being built. That new assessed value is then multiplied by what the existing tax rate is. And then that's how it changes. And we keep building that increment up. Yes.
So if a project takes like 4 years to build.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
If, say, a project takes 4 years to build, it's reassessed every year. Not, they don't wait till it's finished.
No, generally, actually, I'll be honest with you, it changes by county on how they do that. We have some counties that do reassess in the years that it's being constructed, but we have a lot of counties that, and I believe Clay County is the same this way, that they do not reassess when it's being constructed.
That's
And
what
then
I'm-
once it's developed, you get a new assessed valuation.
Right. That's what I
But we have had instances where it's being constructed, but nothing's happening on the property. And so obviously the value may fluctuate a little bit, but we don't see much increment that's being generated there. Oh.
Oh, the sound is not working for them.
Mm.
I don't think that's earlier.
Is it working now? Okay, I guess, let's see. Yes.
It is working now.
Okay.
We can only see Adam, so that was a thumbs up. You can hear us.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you, Adam. All right, so we'll do a similar breakdown with EATS. So our base collected prior to the TIF, $1,000. Same situation. We have a base, it's received back by the taxing jurisdictions. The increment. So the sales tax generated from the economic activity, $101,000. Total revenue is obviously $101,000. The total increment, $100,000. So in this instance, with the EATS, 50,000 of that is captured by the TIF to flow into the special allocation fund. $50,000 of that is collected by the taxing jurisdictions. Do we have any questions about how pilots and EATS flow into the special allocation fund or just how they're captured? The city. Mhm. Yep. Yes. Sorry, when we pass the ordinance, we are required by statute to create a special allocation fund for that particular TIF plan. So it is segregated funds that are held. And then within that, we create sub-accounts for the pilots and for the EATS. So at any point in time, Stephen with the city can pull up, and be like, this is what came in here. This is in our pilots accounts. And this is what flowed in through the EATS. All right, same, that the base amount remains constant and then the amount changes, the increment changes based on the EATs that are generated within the project. All right, so we're going to get into a little bit more technical. So there are surplus pilots and EATs. So a surplus is a portion of the pilots and or the EATs that may be designated by the city as surplus revenues not needed for the project. So the surplus is paid to the county collector for distribution to the taxing jurisdictions. And then the surplus EATs are handled in the same manner, but distributed on the basis of tax levies. So does a city have to capture the maximum pilots and EATs? Technical answer is yes. Practical answer is no. While we can't include in the ordinance authorizing the initial collection to be anything other than what is statutorily designated, which is again, the 100% and then the 50%. The city could achieve these by lowering by declaring certain TIF revenues as surplus. And there are cities that we work with that have done this. So for example, if the goal is to achieve a 60% effective rate for the capture of pilots, then the TIF plan will require that 40% of the pilots be declared as surplus back to the taxing jurisdiction. So the property owner would pay 100% of that incremental tax rate that he's or she's supposed to, but 60% would flow back into the special allocation fund and 40% would go back to the taxing jurisdictions plus the base. Does that make sense? It's just kind of a workaround. It is doable. So there also is a thing called a capital contribution. So there is a way within the TIF Act to take a percentage of revenues to return them back to a single taxing jurisdiction. However, it has to be a capital cost that is directly as a result of the redevelopment plan or the project that's being built. So if there's a capital contribution, there has to be the city has to make a finding that that capital expense that that taxing jurisdiction is going to have is a result of this project. And then they can decide, okay, then this capital contribution can flow back. There are statutory reimbursements now. In 2014, the legislature made a change that fire districts and ambulance districts are allowed to request a reimbursement up to 100% of their the fire district here has both a sales tax and a property tax. So they can designate how much of that they want to flow into the special allocation fund and how much they want to keep. They can do that one of two ways. They can make an annual decision on how they want to do that, or they can do an agreement with the city or with a developer that provides for what they're going to do over the course of the plan, however many years that may be. Do we have any questions about that? That's kind of an interesting concept. All right, so we'll talk about what the TIF plan itself is. So what is the TIF plan? And as you can see here, there are required elements to go within a TIF plan. So general description of the project, estimated redevelopment project costs, what their sources of funds are going to be to pay the costs. We have to have the evidence of commitment to finance the project. A lot of these developers are using not only equity, but they're getting a bank loan for it. And so we have to have evidence of that commitment, that they have the equity to back it up, and that they also, if they're getting a loan, a letter from the bank. The anticipated type and term of debt obligations. So there can be bonds that are issued that are supported by the revenues that are generated by a TIF. And if they anticipate doing that, then they have to put that within the TIF plan. The most recent, so what the current assessed valuation is, and then what they're going to anticipate the assessed value is after the project is built. And then also the general land uses in the redevelopment area. So just as a definition, when we say redevelopment project costs, that means the total overall costs of the project. And then we continue on.
And that's all done by the developer.
Yes, so the TIF plan is put together by the developer, and we'll go through this. Actually, that's a perfect segue into this next slide. So how is a TIF plan approved? Now, this is Smithville's process and how we've worked through how this is going to work. So generally what happens is the developer will approach the city with a proposal. The city then initiates negotiations. So they will come to us, be like, we want to do a TIF, here's our TIF plan, and we'll go through that process. We, at that point, will negotiate a funding agreement that the developer will pay for. They will put money into an account that will pay for the city's time to review and negotiate these things. Will pay for my time to review and negotiate these things. And then, so that I do want to make clear that the funding agreement and our time to do these is not taxpayer funded. That is funded by the developer whenever they approach us with these projects. So then we ask the developer to approach the taxing jurisdiction. So in this case, they will need to be the ones that will need to go talk to everybody to explain that a TIF plan is coming. They then, as we're doing this, they tend to have a plan, but there's going to go through numerous changes before the plan that they bring us is hardly ever the plan that we end up having filed. There is a request for bids and proposals. So this will be interesting. The statute requires, the TIF statute requires that the city, even though they have a plan and a developer that has brought forth a TIF plan, the city is required to put forth a request for bids and proposals for that property. So even though the property is owned by a single developer, or a group of developers, it doesn't matter. They still solicit the bids. They say, if anybody has any alternative projects or any proposals, bring them forward. We'll see them. But they do within that are required to say, okay, well, if you don't own the property, how are you gonna get that? But that is, so if you ever see, whenever you know there's a TIF plan that a developer is bringing forward and you're like, oh, why on earth is the city soliciting bids for this? That's why it is a statutory required step in this process. We then mail notice to taxing jurisdictions. That is the 45-day notice that goes out. We then publish it twice in the newspaper. And then we mail notice to the property owners as well. So this is a pretty detailed, this is a long process. I mean, the negotiation itself can take a couple of months, but then once we start that 45-day notice, once they file it, it tends to take roughly 75 days to get this done. And that's in the fastest instance. Okay, do we have any questions about this portion of it? Because then we're kind of jump into whenever you guys come in, which is the TIF Commission public hearing. So all those public notices, everything that we're sending out is for the public hearing. That's you guys. You are establishing the record for the Board of Aldermen. We will go through and you will be extremely bored because I will go line by line through the TIF plan because there are certain findings that have to be made. There are certain things that have to be held into the TIF plan. So we will go through those line by line. So once we have the public hearing, which obviously the public is able to come and speak at, you guys would make a recommendation to the governing body. The governing body then has an ordinance that could approve or not the plan. And then once they approve the plan, the governing body approves the project and that starts the clock. So that's whenever they talk about the term of the TIF. Once we approve, it's all set by that project. And it could be that the city approves the plan, but doesn't approve the project. That can happen. It has to happen within 10 years. And we'll talk about that, but that could happen later. But the project approval ordinance is whatever our clock starts for the term of the TIF. So do we have any questions about, we're going to get into findings and everything too.
Break that down a little bit more for me, project versus plan.
We
like
will.
how- Okay, all right.
Yeah,
No.
we will. That'll come. That's going to come. And here, yeah. No, and there's a lot to it. I mean, there's a lot of levels and we'll talk about it. So we can talk here a little bit about just the composition. So the TIF Commission composition is currently 12 members. It used to be 11. And because Clay County changed their form of government, they went to they passed their constitution and they moved into an upper echelon of population. We now have to have a 12-member TIF Commission. I could go into the history of it. This was technically supposed to be for 3 counties in St. Louis. It is now includes Clay County, which is wonderful. So it changed over. It used to be that there were 6 members appointed by the city. There are now 6 members appointed by the county, 3 members appointed by the city, where it used to be 2 members appointed by the county, 2 appointed by the school district, which has not changed, and then 1 that is appointed by the other taxing jurisdictions, which here includes the ambulance, the fire, the library district, the zoo. Those are your other taxing jurisdictions, plus the state actually as well. And yeah, sorry, I got off my train of thought. All right, do we have any more questions about this or the composition of the TIF Commission? There are 12 members, yes. Yep, at full capacity. And this is right where you're representing the interests of you're representing, if you're appointed by the county, appointed by the city, you're representing those interests, right? That's your role, to make sure that not only do we have a legally valid TIF plan, but, you know, does it make sense for the city of Smithville? All right, so our required findings. So like I said, there are certain required findings that have to be made in order for a TIF plan to be approved. So the redevelopment area is blighted or a conservation area. There is a third way. If you look at the statute, you'll see that there is something called an economic development area. Our firm has made a internal decision that that is not legal. So we don't generally work with economic development area TIFs. I will go into the definition of blight later. It's pretty lengthy, and we'll go over that whenever we have the TIF plan in front of us. There also has to be a but-for test. So the redevelopment area has not and would not reasonably be anticipated to be developed without the adoption of tax increment financing. And so what will tend to happen is the developer will come in front of this body and explain to you why, but for they could not have built this without TIF. The redevelopment plan conforms to the city comprehensive plan, and then the estimated redevelopment project is completed within 23 years. There is a statutory term placed on TIFs of 23 years. All right, any questions on those findings, or a few more? All right, so they are required to develop a relocation plan if there are any businesses or people that are living within the TIF boundaries. This tends to not affect us. I mean, it's still required, but I mean, generally the places that we are working with TIFs, there aren't anybody in there. There has to be a cost benefit analysis and a financial feasibility study. So that will show the economic impact on each taxing jurisdiction if the project is not built with TIF project, and then to make sure there's an adequate return on investment. And that is something we obviously look at to make sure that with TIF, the return on investment is not astronomical. Also, that this is a fun one, that no development or redevelopment includes a gambling establishment. So no TIF will ever have a gambling establishment in it, just so you know. Yeah. So generally, to just kind of go back to the ROI, a developer will argue, right, that their return on investment without the TIF is inadequate or negative, right? And the city should provide just enough TIF incentive to provide them with a reasonable rate of return back on their investment. All right, so a designation of a redevelopment area. So the redevelopment area must contain property that is classified as a blighted area or a conservation area. Now, okay, I'm going to read this to you, and I will send you the definition too. A blighted area is an area which, by reason of the predominance, unsanitary, not insanitary, unsanitary or unsafe conditions, deterioration of site improvements, or the existence of conditions which endanger life or property by fire or other causes, or any combination of such factors delays the provision of housing accommodations or constitutes an economic or social liability or a menace to the public health, safety, or welfare in its present use or condition. So the legislature recently changed this. That is the statutory definition of blight. It is now uniform across any tax incentive that requires a blight finding. They removed, there used to be, you could find blight if there was defective or inadequate street layout or obsolete platting. That was a reason for blight. Or it constitutes a menace to public morals, which is always a fun one whenever you're reading a blight study. But those were removed. And so whenever we're looking at blight, we're now looking at those things that I read you before, and we will send you the definition as well. So a conservation area is a little bit different, and that is any improved area within the boundaries of a redevelopment area within the territorial limits of a municipality in which 50% or more of the structures in the area have an age of 35 years or more. That would be a conservation area. So, and then, like I said, no new TIF projects are prohibited in all greenfield areas as of August 28th, 2021. That was a new change. And so greenfield areas are just areas that are agricultural, right? Just completely blank. Well, I could give you the definition, but that was pretty much it. It gets a little bit more complicated. All right. So what happens after a TIF plan is approved? So once we went through that entire process, say the TIF Commission recommended approval. It went to the governing body, they approved it. So what happens? So then we have a redevelopment project area. Pilots and each are generated. That flows into the special allocation fund. And then we can either use the monies in the special allocation fund to pay debt service on bonds or a pay-as-you-go TIF. Generally, we do a pay-as-you-go TIF. That's how they start. And that's how most municipalities work, is they start as a pay-as-you-go TIF, which means that the developer only gets paid as things are being built and as money is being generated. Sometimes prior to 2008 is what I've heard. A lot of TIFs in some metro areas they would issue bonds that would pay back the developer for building the project. And then the pilots and eats would then pay off the debt service on the bonds. That rarely happens anymore, that a bonds would be issued immediately once a TIF is approved. They all tend to be pay as you go. So then just after this process, there's a redevelopment contract between the developer and the city that lays out who is going to maintain the project, who is going to operate the project, right? Tends to be the developer, who is going to hold the special allocation funds, the city, requirements. If the developer sells any land within it, you have to put these, that there are eats and pilots that are collected. So, potential buyers of lots there understand what's happening. We tend to set a maximum cap of redevelopment project costs. So a developer doesn't just come in and say, I want everything that we are spending that's allowed under the TIF Act, we want to be reimbursed for. Now, it tends to be, this is the percentage that the city is comfortable with, and that's the cap that we're going to put on it. And then once you meet that cap, if it's before 23 years, fantastic, we're ending this TIF early, or however many years that the TIF is in place for. So that will be negotiated within the TIF contract. So then also the ordinance would create the special allocation fund. The developer would begin their project, and then the city would collect the pilots and needs. So any questions on how that? I know this is kind of like just continuing to reiterate these, but. All right, and I just read that while I've been thinking about it. So then, city collects pilots and eats, and then city would disperse funds. So it says there's a trustee involved, there are bonds, but usually it's Stephen, the finance director, that's distributing either things back to the taxing jurisdictions or to the developer. The developer through the TIF contract is required to submit a cost certification. So when they want costs to be certified and paid back, they submit every invoice for everything that they're asking to be submitted for. I go through all of those one by one and make sure everything matches, checks to invoices, that it was something that's able to be paid for, approved in the budget that we were comfortable with. And then we certify that, and then monies can begin flowing to them. But it is, I think, also a misconception sometimes that, once this is in, the money just flows and that's it. There's quite a few steps and checks that they have to go through to make sure we're legal and everything's within the confines of the statute and everything's okay. All right, so this is just a breakdown of pay-as-you-go reimbursement and TIF bonds. We've talked about this a few slides back, that with pay-as-you-go, the funds are paid to the developer as they're collected, maximum collection period of 23 years. This is also something that's very interesting. The minute the TIF clock is started, if the TIF clock is started on June 7th, on June 6th, 23 years in the future, if that's the term, the TIF, that's it. The monies that are in the special allocation fund, that's what's available. Anything collected afterward, it goes back to the taxing jurisdictions. Even if money flows in from the county into the special allocation fund on June 7th, doesn't matter. They don't have access to it. So TIF bonds, again, may be issued to provide funds up front, another maximum maturity of 23 years, payable from the captured amounts, and then can be issued on a tax exempt basis. All right, so what can TIF revenues pay for? Quite a few things. TIF is pretty interesting in that fact. Land acquisition costs, demolition and clearing, cost to rehabilitate existing buildings, construct public improvements, construct private improvements, cost of studies, surveys, engineering plans, professional service costs, financing costs, and then relocation costs also for anybody that may be displaced by the TIF. And this is what is allowed by the statute. Cities are able to go in and limit So there have been some cities that would negotiate, we won't pay for any land acquisition costs. We will pay for all of these other things. So that's negotiable as well. And then, like I said, similarly with this, cities will negotiate a cap to make sure that there's a limit on what's being paid back. All right, so Jennifer, this is getting to your point that you asked. So what happens when we have a TIF? So a ordinance will create a redevelopment area, and the redevelopment area is the boundary where the TIF revenues are being created. Within that, there are redevelopment project areas. It could be that there is one redevelopment project area and its boundaries match the redevelopment area as a whole, or there could be multiple different phases that are built at different times. You'll see that when the TIF plan is approved, they will designate the redevelopment area, but then the city has 10 years from the approval of the TIF plan to approve a project. And then once you approve the project, the 23-year or 15-year or 10-year, whatever it is, clock starts of the term of the TIF, depending on what was in the TIF plan. So you can see here that like if we approved the plan and we activated project area number 1, that starts in 2023, ends in 2046. Same with project area 2. If we activate it in 2024, that goes to 2047. Same situation with 3 and 4. But again, they have to activate all projects within 10 years. After the 10-year period, you can't activate any more projects. And each one would be activated by its own ordinance. Any questions about how that is set up? And you can segregate funds, but we won't talk about that because that's boring.
I guess my question would
Yeah.
be then, so really 23 years could turn into 33 years, according to that.
Depending on, yes, yeah, depending on how many redevelopment project areas there are. And I haven't worked on many that have multiple project areas that are activated within different times. I have worked on a handful, but that is negotiated with the city and then obviously very upfront, a point of discussion in the TIF Commission, right? As to what that means ultimately. But I will say that in each project area, right, that the funds wouldn't flow. If you have a fully built out redevelopment project area 1, that in 23 years, that one goes off the clock, right? And all the flows go back. So like, it looks like this, but the redevelopment project area number 4 would continue on, but 1 would roll off and the full amount of funds would flow back to the taxing jurisdictions. So it's kind of like a stair step process, right? Just because that one ends in 2049 does not mean the rest of them then are looped into 2049. They will all turn off at 23 years based on when they were activated. Or like I said, I use that just because that's the statutory maximum. It wouldn't maintain, like, keep going with the last to be approved. Any more questions? That's a really good question. All right, so now we'll get into the roles of all the parties here. So what is your role as a TIF commission? So you provide a forum for representation and input by all the taxing jurisdictions affected. You review the TIF plan and all the supporting documents. You conduct the public hearing. You accept evidence and testimony during the public hearing, and you create the record that will be reviewed by the Board of Aldermen whenever they go to approve or not an ordinance. And then you make that recommendation. This changes, it's different than what it used to be, but a TIF commission can recommend that the governing body should not approve a TIF plan. You could make a recommendation in opposition. It used to be that there was a supermajority of the Board of Aldermen that could, almost like a veto, they could override that and approve it anyway. But now, if a TIF commission done under the subsection, which you are, makes a recommendation in opposition, if the governing body goes ahead and approves it, the developer is limited to only getting repaid for demolition and clearing of buildings. And I believe, sorry, I wrote it down. The demolition of buildings and the grading and clearing of land. That's what they'd be limited to. Yes, that's it. None of the other remaining costs they would ask to build. You can ask for additional, so whenever a TIF plan is brought to you, if you're not happy in it, you don't have to finish the public hearing. You could continue the public hearing to another date. And then you can ask them to make changes to the plan. Okay, we want it, we don't like this, we want to see this, we want to see this. And then I don't know, they could agree to that and and they would bring another one back and we continue the public hearing, it would move on. Or they could not do that and, it would end then and there. So. What, yes. Oh, I went too far. Okay, so what is the role of the Board of Aldermen? So they approve the TIF plan, the redevelopment area. They make the determination of blight. They approve the project areas. They select the developer. They're required to select the developer. They make a determination of whether the incentive is a good use for the good of the city. They will enter into the TIF contract, and then they pass legislation to implement the TIF plan and manage and create the special allocation fund. So then what is the role of city staff and consultants? So we prepare and review and evaluate plans. We prepare the analysis and the recommendations. So like I said, I will draft a memo detailing, kind of summarizing the plan for you guys, telling you what pages have certain things on them for the required findings. We help prepare ordinances and the resolutions and all of the contracts. We complete the statutory requirements. So the notices, the RFP, the hearings, that's all us. We do all of that and make sure that we're in compliance with the statute there. We draft and negotiate the TIF contract and then help implement the TIF plan after approval. And please, this is not something that's easily forgot about. TIF plans are extremely hard on the back end. And there's a lot of work that goes in it by city staff to make sure that this is running smoothly and correctly. All right, so we can talk about what is in the TIF contract if you want to. So again, terms of land acquisition, condemnation if it's needed, their obligations to build and maintain the project, the schedule and their budgets, whatever obligations the city and the developer may have for financing that project, the procedures for imposing and administering the TIF, other restrictions and obligations, the indemnification of the city, the insurance that they're required to have on the property, and then a coordination of other financing tools. So there are other, tax incentive programs that could be layered on top of a TIF, community improvement district, a transportation development district. If those were to be utilized in conjunction with a TIF plan, those things would be coordinated within the TIF contract as well to make sure everything's running correctly. And that is it. I had a thank you slide. I'm sorry. Thank you. So that's all of it in a nutshell. Like I said, we can provide you with this. Does anybody just have any general questions? I mean, this is a lot of information.
Our group of 12, will we just be involved in TIF projects in Smithville?
Yes, this
Not-
is the
not
Smithville TIF
Liberty,
Commission.
Not anywhere else.
Right. So this is kind of interesting. The change of this TIF commission affected the entire county. So it affects every community within the county. I think we can get into speculations here that I think what was intended for St. Louis was that there would be one TIF commission. I do not think that's how it's going to work in Clay County. I think that it will be individual TIF commissions for each community, as I think it should be. Oh, ones with active TIFs, there are a lot. Just off the top of my head, believe it or not, Independence has property in Clay County, so they're affected by this. Excelsior Springs, Liberty, North Kansas City, Kearney was affected by this, Gladstone. So it was this was kind of a, whenever the change happened over, it was kind of a rush to figure out how we were going to deal with it because the ways of appointing TIF commissioners now is very different than the way it was in the past.
In downtown, do we have a community improvement district right now? In Smithville, we don't. Okay, because
Not-
I know Liberty has one, so I didn't think we did, but I wanted to just clarify that to make
Not in
sure.
downtown.
And then do we have any other types of incentive types of, you mentioned that was possible layering. Is there anything else that we would need to know about just to
No.
have? Okay, so right now, this is what's available to potential developers.
No. Okay. Okay, we're gonna border the line into, let's use Marketplace for an example. So Marketplace has a CID and a TIF.
Okay.
That works in conjunction. So CID is very different, limited in what they can build, but that one in particular has a sales tax that's associated.
And I think most of them do have. a
Most
sales
of them do.
tax.
They can have
Yeah.
special assessments, they can do property taxes, and they can do sales taxes. And so the sales taxes, that 1% is obviously 50% of it is captured by the TIF, flows in the special allocation fund. The other 50% is then used to build public improvements that are allowable under the CID Act. So yes, eventually, someday, there could be a TIF in front of the body that has other tax incentives that are layered on top of the TIF. And at that point, we would do a CID 101. And we talk about that, even though a CID doesn't have the same type of approval process, it doesn't have its own CID board. TIFs are unique because they are taking away, there are taxes that are being redistributed to a different place, already existing taxes. And so that's why the legislature built in a board consisting of the taxing jurisdictions to make sure that everybody has a voice, where there's just not that in the other taxing incentive programs.
So if someone comes to us with a plan, we would be made aware if there was going to be a CID in conjunction with that, so that we're making sure we're not over allowing,
Right. You would see if there was a CID that was going to be coming, you would see in the flow of funds what they're anticipating the CID to be bringing in terms of revenues. And then also that would be shown on like the back end as well, whenever you see the CBA.
Yeah, we just don't want somebody to be able to inflate something that they shouldn't
Right.
necessarily have if there's already something else there, so.
Right. Yes. If there was something, and generally whenever you'd see a budget, if you have multiple layered, it would show what costs. So these costs are being funded by private equity. These we're asking for reimbursement under the TIF, and these costs we're going to ask for reimbursement under the CID or TDD or whatever it may be.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Will you send us something with all of our names on it, phone numbers, all that?
Yep.
We'll all
Yep.
know
We
each other.
can get that together. Okay.
Soon we can talk.
You are subject to the sunshine law, just so you know. You are a board that's under the city, and so yes and no, I would defer to Cynthia to talk about. Right, that's not a problem.
Correct. You don't want to have a meeting
Yeah.
outside of, or send emails to one another and communicate in that way. Correct. And you want to be careful of that chain discussion as well. So you have a meeting with one person and then you have a meeting with someone else. And so you want to be very careful of those discussions.
And I work all the time. So if you have any questions, you guys can email me. Obviously they can get a hold of me at any time too. So I sent you all an email, so you should have my email and my direct phone number if you have any questions. But like I said, this is kind of it's overwhelming. And so, yeah, please don't hesitate to ask me any questions. Actually, that is something that's very interesting. Yeah, my fees are not paid by the city. My hourly rate is paid by the developer. So that's that funding agreement that we talked about. When the funding agreement gets put in place, a developer will put funds into an account, and then that's what my fee is paid out of. And then ongoing, we get rid of that funding agreement with the redevelopment contract, and then my fee is paid out of developer costs as well, ongoing. Yeah. Yep. My firm, just in general, we only work for cities and municipalities. We work in public finance. And so, yeah, we don't work for any type of developers or anything. So we work on a kind of a flat fee basis. Okay. Yeah. Yep, we can get that sent out, and obviously, like I said, before any TIF commission hearing, I will send you a memo. We will draft this. We will make sure you have plenty of lead time. You'll have the plan, you will have the memo, you'll be able to see, because I make a key, it'll say on page 10 is the cost benefit analysis, and then you can flip to page 10. So you can make sure that not only are we meeting our statutory findings, we have all the statutorily required items within the TIF plan, but we'll direct you to make sure that you know where they're at in the TIF. So that I'm just here as kind of like legally, you got everything that you need, and I can help you from the legal side, but it's up for you to make the legislative recommendation.
How early do you usually send those out? Because my understanding, and these were from Kansas City, some of those are very lengthy.
Yes, they are long. I think we were thinking 2 weeks ahead of
Oh,
time.
perfect.
Is that enough?
Yeah, I mean, there's several hundred pages usually, so.
I'm working through the memo right now. So I was hoping to get that out to you 2 weeks in advance so that you had the TIF plan, and you had the memo, and if there were any questions generated.
Great, thank you.
You've got a plan coming, right? Across the street.
That is the plan that we'll have. Thank you.
That is the plan that would, and there. Yes,
Yes. Oh,
Yeah, so they're well ahead.
yeah, we would not bring a plan forward to the board until it has gone through the city staff and has gone through me to make sure that we have something that's worthy of bringing to the board.
Right.
Any other questions? This is fun stuff. It's a fair part of my job.
Appreciate it.
All right. I think with that, let's go ahead and adjourn. And so next time that you see us, we'll do all the fun stuff. Elect a chairman and somebody else gets to run the meeting. No.
and
That'll
so
be at the
just to
public
clarify,
hearing,
yes,
yes.
so 2 weeks in advance of that, so that is set for
March
March
30th.
30th. So
Yep.
that's, is that 5 weeks from tonight? Is that right?
So, and I have a.
It's a Thursday, so yeah. okay.
So once we do that, at the next meeting, we will do all of the required. And I will tell you, just to plan, we'll have a third meeting as well, just so we can approve the minutes from the, because I like to tie my bows nice and tight, and so we don't have anything out there lingering, any meeting minutes that aren't signed. So, yeah. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I know I can drone on. You'll get really sick of my voice.
I needed it.
You. Thanks, guys.